Hello, this is Erica, and I am here to show you the ways that kiddos could use the UPS Chat Graphic Organizer to organize their thoughts as they go through the process of solving a word problem. So, starting out, just to review, the first box is the U box, which stands for understand, and that goes along with the TEKS part of that standard that talks about analyzing the word problem. And so they have to read the problem, figure out what they're looking for, and figure out what they know that's going to help them find what they're looking for. Then they're going to go into the plan box where they can draw a picture or use any strategy that they might want to. Usually we encourage them to try using a strip diagram because that's going to help them whenever they're having to analyze strip diagrams if they've drawn those themselves. But they can use other strategies as well. Of course, we encourage them to act those problems out if they need to with blocks or other kinds of counters or whatever it might be. And then they're going to go into the solve box where they actually solve the problem using an equation usually, could be an area model, whatever strategies they want to use there. And they could use expanded form when they're like, say, second grade, adding three-digit numbers. And then they're going to go to the check box where they check their answer for reasonableness. And then the last part is where they explain and justify their answer. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the first problem. I've just scanned these in. I went ahead and worked them out just so that the video would go by quicker. What the first thing the kids would do is they read the whole problem and then they say, what am I looking for? And they bracket the question and they put a question mark by any words that might help them label what they're looking for. So they're looking for total pies. So they put a big T for total next to the word pies because they're looking for total pies. And then they write total pies next to the question mark. And then they say, what do I know? Circle the numbers. And so they're going to circle any numbers that are going to help them find total pies. So they know that on Thursday there were 241 pies, and on Friday there were 335 pies, and so they write that here. It's important that they do put their label next to the number because that's going to help them figure out sometimes if their groups are the same or not the same, which helps them decide if they're multiplying or adding sometimes. Then they also want to label this is Thursday, this is Friday. They could have just put T for Thursday, TH, whatever they want to do there, but it's just we don't want them to get bogged down with writing. Okay, and then you move to the plan, and if they have this, that's going to help them tremendously as they get ready to plan. So they know they're looking for the total, so they put their question mark in a total box, which could be a total line like this, because they might see that sometimes, or in a box, and the total box can be on the top or the bottom, either way. And so then they will say, okay, I don't know the total, but I do know one of my parts, which was Thursday, and I do know the other part was 335 on Friday, and those two groups are unequal. And so I do know that I'm going to join those two unequal groups. So my thinking pattern is join unequal groups or jug, which tells me to add. So I'm going to add those and then get my answer, and my label is total pies, which is what I was looking for here. Then I'm going to check for reasonableness. And when we're adding, we tell the kids usually when you're adding, you're going to go from a small number to a big number. So they write S to B for small to big. And then they check, here's the number I started with. Is it smaller than the number I ended with? And it is, so it checks for reasonableness. Then they would down here write out their answer in a sentence explaining how they solved it. Like they might say, I knew to add because there were two groups of pies and they were unequal, so I added them together. Any kind of their thinking that they want to write down there, they can. This is kind of a similar problem using the same I know this and I know this about pies, but the question is different. How many more pies were sold on Friday than on Thursday? So instead of looking for total pies, they're looking for the difference in pies, which means they're comparing two unequal groups. And when they're comparing two unequal groups, they put the bigger number that they're comparing here and the smaller number here, and then they find the difference. In the lower grades to start out, and even in third and fourth grade, I start out explaining this concept by having them compare girls to boys. And so the girls get in a line and the boys get in a line, and they see um, how many more girls there are, how many more boys there are by how many do not have a partner when they line up in a line next to each other. And that kind of helps them see that same thing here. You have 335 pies that were on Friday, 241 if they're lined up next to each other. And then the ones that didn't have a partner would be your difference. And I always refer back to that. In like first grade, they could line them up, draw out a picture where they have say there were 6 and 8, and they could draw those and see which ones don't have a partner. Okay, so they go ahead and subtract it and get 94 more pies because they were looking for the difference. And with subtraction, they need to go from a big number down to a small number, which they did. So they write the number they started with, the number they ended with, and that checked. And then they also do the inverse operation, which is add check here, and they add 94 plus 241. And that's how a subtraction problem might look. In kindergarten, it might look more like this, and you can see here's the U for understand, the plan, which is where they're going to act it out with manipulatives or blocks, or you can give them these little squares that are cut out down here at the bottom. What I did when I taught kindergarten is I cut out a bunch of them that went with that problem of the day and just put them in a basket in the middle of their table so they could just grab what they needed and they weren't having to worry about cutting and pasting. And everything in kindergarten, when we're doing this process, is done together and modeled. And so they basically are just tracing numbers and words over here, but we're talking about it as we go. And then they act it out, and then they draw it out, and it ends up looking like this. So they've acted it out and they go ahead and can glue those on, and then they draw it. And in the strip diagram in kindergarten, they're not focused so much on strip diagram as the draw it out, but it's putting it into the diagram so that when they get into older grades, that's going to help them to see that strip diagram, and it won't be their first exposure to it. And instead of them doing the whole jug that join unequal groups, they could just put a J for joining, or just have them circle that J because it's actually already there for them. This is what it might look like when they're doing subtraction in kindergarten or even the beginning of first grade. And you can see that some frogs, they're asking for frogs left. So it might look like this when they're done. And they were separating unequal groups instead of comparing or joining. They're separating two unequal groups because these 4 popped out. And so those are separated from the big group of 6. And then they drew it out here. They could also draw a picture here with their circles if you wanted them to. This is another example of first grade. I'm sorry, this is first grade later in the year. In first grade, at the beginning of the year, I go ahead and I put these in there for them. And then as the year progresses, they can write more. And here, instead of writing out the whole word chocolate, they might just put CH and a V for chocolate and vanilla because I don't want them to get bogged down with a bunch of writing. They could put big T and C for total cones. Okay, so here's one of the strategies they use, a number line. They can also use a number path rather than a number line. Here is a strip diagram where they had to draw it out. I also have them, if they want to draw it out right here, I start out by having them draw it out here and then just put it into the strip diagram. And then we figured out that we're joining two unequal groups, so we're adding, and all that still goes through. I don't have them do a lot of writing to explain. I usually just have them explain it out loud rather than writing a sentence. You know your kids and whether or not that would be possible for them or not. They could just explain what they've got as far as their work on the page goes. I will say, related to actually all grade levels, when I'm first teaching UPS Chick, if they haven't used it before, I really, really model, and I have big part whole mats or strip diagram mats where they actually put the manipulatives into those boxes on another mat. And then that helps to transfer it later into this format. This is an example of what a division problem in fourth grade might look like. You can see they were looking for the how much each person gets, so the dollars for each person. And notice I didn't have them write out money because that's just a big long word that they don't have to, so you can just put a dollar sign. And then I did have them label the total, and up here they knew the total. They knew they were getting the same amount. They might write equal there instead of same. And then they know there's 8 people in each family. So when they're drawing that out, they would put 40 in the total box, and then that is divided or separated into 8 equal groups, but they don't know how much is in each group. And so they put a question mark there. And notice I put a question mark under the word each. That way they know that they don't know how much is in each box. And then that is separating equal groups. So we're going to divide. And so they go ahead and do that. Again, they could use strategies as they progress. They can use different things, but if they need to use blocks or they need to use their multiplication fact, they could have shown their multiplication fact that helped them there. They could have used skip counting, whatever strategy they might want to use. And then they check it. They know they're going from a big number down to a small number, so that checked. And this is just an extra scaffolding that I've put into some of them. And then they did the inverse operation of 5 times 8 equals 40. Here is what a multiplication problem might look like. You can see it was looking for total books. Here I did draw a picture of each box right here because it says there are 8 books in each. So I went ahead and drew a box so that that thinking would transfer when they're drawing their strip diagram. And that strip diagram will help them realize that they were looking for a total. So they're joining equal groups because it's 8, 8, 8. So I have 3 equal groups of 8, 3 times 8 to get 24. And then I'm showing that I'm going from a small number to a big number. And then I did repeated addition to check that. A lot of teachers will ask me about how to do two-step problems. That actually is a very, very common problem or common question, I should say. And so we all know that's one of the most difficult things kids have. So here's an example of how they would do that. You would divide your plan and your solve box into 2 steps once they realize that there's more than one step. And they will say, okay, I'm looking for the change she received. But before I can find that, I have a hidden question, which is the total that was spent. So my hidden question for step 1 is the total she spent. And I do know that it was 45 on chocolate pies, 27 on cookies, $15 on cherry pies, and I know that there was $100 given. But I don't know how much altogether this was. So I go ahead and step 1 and draw that out with a strip diagram and figure out I'm joining 3 unequal groups. So I'm going to add. So I add those up. Then after I get that, that's something now that I know, which I really should have written right over here is, and something I know for step 2 is this is a total of 87. And then I would go to step 2, and I know that I had $100 to start with. 87 of it got separated because I spent it. So separating 2 unequal groups, $100 separating 87 from that will give me how much I have left, which tells me to subtract. So I subtract that, and then I do a check. Now I went ahead and checked both steps there for reasonableness. And the second step, we did an add check to check the subtraction problem. And that is the end of my examples, and I hope that you will be able to see the power that that can have with kiddos when they are needing a place to start, when they're solving a word problem. This has really changed my life and my kids' lives as we are trying to attack a word problem. It makes it where it's not so overwhelming to them because they have a plan. At the beginning of the year, I do start out by having them draw these out, the boxes, or I give them a box to do it. And that helps them to practice the process every single day with at least one problem. And we call it our problem of the day. And that usually is just a spiral review problem, but they're practicing those steps of UPS check, which goes along with our TEKS and the process standard, so that when they come to other word problems, all they would have to do is do the shortcut, which is like the bracket, the question, circle the numbers, And I do go ahead and have them always, even if they're not doing it in UPS, check boxes out next to the problem, draw out a plan and solve it, of course, and show their check. So basically, when they're working their steps out, this is the part they don't have to write out, but they're doing it because they've learned it every single day, and that's going to help them. If you have any questions, just let me know, but I wanted you guys to have a little bit of an overview. Thank you.